is interesting. They're urging us to not adopt this yet, I think. Here. Defer adoption of the proposed amendment.
And I'm showing it no respect at all. Gosh, you haven't even said go yet, and I'm already offending people. I keep forgetting which one I'm reading, so I'm gonna fix that. Here we go.
I guess we'll have to look at it because, it's something we don't want to encourage.
Yeah.
We have
Seems
sometimes very different opinions, but it's cool to see the way that
yeah, certainly.
it's really, really a
Huh?
No.
No, of course I hate this. There's a little bit.
No, I think we've got our skateboard ordinances, there's like downtown zone.
Huh?
which is not.
Oh, because you guys go around and around and around.
You went up Prairie Grade, straight on set. But I turned left behind you.
It's not one of those ordinances I wrote years ago, I kind of forgot what I wrote.
Yeah, I don't think so, but we both missed it.
Your wife was in the car with you.
Now I don't feel bad.
To help with technology.
Yeah, maybe it is for the next meeting, for the meeting before that.
Yeah, if you want to talk about that.
Did you have an uh-oh moment?
What's that?
Did you have an uh-oh moment?
No, well, yeah, we both.
I remember the first day that roundabout opened, we went to Milan.
Requirements of
And this guy was going around.
Is that-
It has to be received by.
Was that you?
24-day period, it should be received.
That's funny.
And show that it's by first of living or by a certified kids and a certified mom.
My wife went down
You know, I had a feeling they didn't get it on August 1st. She sent it by first class mail on the
to
first.
5, 6 years ago, so we stopped around. Because I didn't know what to do. She just stopped. It's like,
What's
I'm
that?
going over the other truck just going over.
Pretend today.
They'll go through everything, so.
It's unfair, if they're
They're
gonna
cropping up in all kinds of places. In Washington County,
Apparently, they have liquidating
so if I can get rid of it.
you can see almost scanning through people's eyes until they realize exactly what's going on.
Yeah, let's try the East Coast.
Oh,
There's huge ones that come off the freeway.
I looked at a listing today of like a new rentals for somebody at the Chamber.
I can imagine.
And they're all like,
It's the same stuff that she was bombarding us with. So it's totally, I think technology, it doesn't force anything for us. Oh, no, I think you're totally right. No problem. But they get a honk out one.
I need to be more
one of the problems is not every roundabout is created equal.
Or if
If it's something relevant,
Sometimes they change the
Offerings went the same direction.
That's right.
That's when it would get, that's the language. Maybe, maybe utilities.
try to be
Garbage, showing my skill for
sympathetic, I guess we're trying not to be nasty, but it's just, it's getting.
Which always bothers people
According
like
to
me, cause
clock
I
on the wall, it's now 6.
Yeah.
Call meeting to order. First thing is roll call.
Brett Bybee,
Here?
Sharon Duval,
Here.
Chris LaViere,
Here.
John Nelson.
Here.
Mark Popoff is absent, Steve Ross,
Here.
Jeff Strauss.
Here.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any corrections or changes to the agenda as it was published? Not, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I so move.
I motion to approve the agenda.
You want to second it? You already.
I'll second it.
Okay. Moved and seconded, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, we're off and rolling. Next item is the approval of the minutes from the June 21st meeting. Do we have any corrections to that meeting? To the minutes?
I only have one question. Jean, were you here?
The 21st,
It was a long time ago. I can't remember.
I'll have to look, I think I may have been absent that meeting, if I can take a quick look. It's like, that was the one with the discussion on, public meeting
On
process.
right.
Yeah, I
Yes.
believe I was absent.
So that's the only correction I would have.
Okay. Do we have any additional corrections? Do we have the motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes as amended.
I'll second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your right hand.
I abstain. Wasn't here.
Okay, one abstention. Okay. Next item on the agenda is our time for public comment. This is time for anybody who would like to speak on anything that is relevant that is not on the tonight's agenda.
I'd like to just make a comment.
Okay. Give us your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. My name's Delia Thompson, spelled D-A-L-I-E-A Thompson. And my address is 724 East 20th here in the Dalles.
Okay.
And I just came out of interest about housing needs in our community, and Don Hurt was kind enough to give me your agenda and your housing needs analysis code amendments, and your amendments here. And I just wanted to mention how pleased I am and very, very encouraged to see this planning commission looking at a myriad of different housing options, including accessory dwellings. I've lived in this community my entire life. My family and I have several properties here. We are landlords for low income, middle income, and high end folks. Between us, we probably have 65 units. I've also personally housed a homeless person in my home for 5 years. I have lived here my entire life, my family has, and we all care about the community. And I just want to tell you, I am so encouraged to see that this planning commission is looking at lots of options for lots of people in the whole community, and I just wanted to mention that. So thank you very much for your hard work.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we'll move on to our legislative hearing. This is application number Z0A97-18 by the City of the Dalles. The application is a request to amend the Dalles Municipal Code, Title 10, Land Use and Development. The purpose of it is to bring the city's development and regulations into compliance with the state law and to encourage the development of a range of need types of housing. The changes seek to remove unnecessary barriers to the development of accessory dwellings, units, townhouses, duplexes, and triplexes while maintaining important standards that regulate the form and character of the new development. I'm supposed to ask, does any members of the commission or the wish to make any disclosure or abstain from participating or voting on the matter being heard because of possible financial gain resulting from legislative action? Okay, then I will turn it over to Steve and you can walk us through this, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Good evening. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge our new planning commissioner this evening, Mr. Brent Bivey. This is his first meeting, and so be kind to him, be easy on him. Ms. Dawn Hurt's going to be giving the staff presentation this evening, give you a summary of some of the activities we've done and the staff report. And then Mr. Matt Hasty from Angelo Planning Group is here this evening. He's our consultant, and he has a more detailed presentation this evening.
Thank you, Chair LaViere and Commissioners. As Chair LaViere explained, this is a legislative hearing. It is in regards to the Housing Needs Analysis Code amendments to our municipal code, Article 10, Land Use and Development. As you know well, we have some changes that we're looking to make to our regulatory code for all land use located inside our urban growth boundary. In 2017, the City of the Dalles completed a housing needs analysis, which considered and recommended a range of proposed amendments to our land use code. And we have worked with Angelo Planning Group to identify some prioritized specific implementation. And in previous meetings, we actually referred to these as low-hanging fruit. So in order to basically, these changes would then ensure that our land use code is consistent with statewide housing goals, administrative rules and statutes, and reduce barriers to development of specific housing types, which are already allowed and supported by the city and state. The group of amendments was presented at 2 work sessions before the Planning Commission, which was April 19th and May 17th. We did include comments from those sessions and incorporated those into the amendments, as well as an open house was held on July 19th at the Civic Auditorium. And Matt will actually explain a little bit more in detail as to who all and what kind of comments came from that meeting. A notification was made. This public hearing was published in the Dalles Chronicle on July 21st, 2018. As of the date of the staff report, there were no comments received. However, staff has received a packet or a couple packets in terms of comments. You have before you, one is dated today. It was received from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon regarding the amendments to the municipal code, Title 10. The second group you have is an email from Ben Basita, who is the record engineer for Chenoweth Water PUD, showing support. And then the last one is a group of a letter dated 5/30/2018, fax dated 6/1/2018, and a fax dated 8/2/2018 from Ms. Lorraine Hunt that was actually sent to Angelo Planning Group and provided to staff today. I did also prepare a amended staff report, so you do have a copy of that. The areas that are highlighted are what has been added and include a little bit more narrative in terms of the goal 10 for housing. So with regards to, I'm actually just going to jump through procedure for the process is a legislative application which requires a public hearing. You provide a recommendation to the City Council for final implementation and or approval or a modification to that code. The notice of a hearing was sent out and as well as sent to the DLCD, which requires a 35-day notice. That was actually sent back in June. And in the staff report that is presented today identifies the criteria and standards that relate to the application and summarizes the basic findings of fact. And then also, the staff report does include a recommendation for approval, excuse me. So in terms of review, the review criteria, proposed text amendments shall be consistent with our comp plan, state laws, and admin rules. And the City of the Dalles has a broad discretion to adopt zoning textual changes. Each of the proposed amendments is consistent with the comp plan, state laws, and administrative rules. In terms of the comprehensive plan, goal 1, citizen involvement. As I stated earlier, we had 2 public meetings here as well as an open house. And we did do public notice in the paper to encourage people to make comment. Goal 2, land use planning, to establish land use planning process and policy framework as a basis for all decisions and actions related to use of land and to assure adequate factual base for such decisions and actions. Our comprehensive plan, policy 6, Implemented this plan through appropriate ordinance and action, implementing measures that shall develop to allow administrative review and approval authority. Staff believes that these amendments update the existing zoning code ordinance and follow the directive of our comprehensive plan. Goal number 10, housing. So this is where I had made some edits to the previous staff report. Goal 10, housing, to provide for housing needs in the citizens of the state. Comprehensive Plan Policy 1, plan for more multifamily and affordable homeownership opportunities, including small lot, single-family residential, townhomes, and manufactured housing development consistent with the city's housing needs analysis. These proposed amendments are consistent with the Comprehensive Plan Policy Number 1 by increasing the opportunity for duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, and accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs, in accordance with the city's 2017 housing needs analysis. The housing needs analysis found that, or identified, the housing needs analysis found that the housing types identified above are projected to make a significant share of new housing development. 27% of the new housing are projected to be in some form of attached housing. Single-family attached units or townhomes are projected to meet 3% of future need. These are defined as units on separate tax lots, attached by a wall, but separately metered, the most common example being a townhome unit. Duplex and fourplex units are projected to represent an additional 11% of the total need. Duplex units would include a detached single-family home with an accessory dwelling unit on the same lot. The housing needs assessment also found that there's enough land zoned for these housing types in the city. However, the land zoned for these housing types must be developed at a higher density. The new housing unit capacity was estimated for the buildable lands identified in the city of the Dalles. There's a total remaining capacity for nearly 3,689 units. There's a total forecasted need for 1,769 units over the next 20 years. This is below the estimated capacity of 3,689 units. There's a current sufficient buildable capacity in the Dalles to accommodate projected need. However, much of this capacity is in the form of parcels with the potential for development or infill with future multifamily units. The size of the available remaining capacity assumes that some high-density and medium-density zoned lands are built out at higher average densities than these areas have traditionally achieved in the past. The Housing Strategies Report, part of the Housing Needs Assessment, found that the land zone for duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, and accessory dwelling units may not be developed for these housing types due to the barriers presented by certain regulatory standards. Proposed amendments are intended to reduce these barriers and facilitate development of these housing types. Policy 2, plan for more efficient use of vacant land by encouraging infill development, which is sensitive to existing neighborhoods, and by encouraging new development, which achieves densities following the comprehensive plan. Staff believes that these amendments are consistent with this policy. Policy number 8, flexibility in implementing ordinances is needed to accommodate infill and to foster a variety of development scenarios and housing options. So finding 13 was also added or emphasized. These proposed amendments are consistent with the comprehensive plan. Policy number 8 by providing flexibility for a variety of housing types and development scenarios. Proposed amendments include reductions in minimum lot area, minimum site area per dwelling unit, as well as reduction in the minimum lot width in residential zones. Proposed changes to the standards will encourage development of ADUs or accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes. Additionally, to ensure in compliance with the Fair Housing Act and state law, residential care homes are being added as primary uses permitted outright. Policy 9, provide for a wide range of housing types, which may include single-family detached and attached housing, townhouses, apartments, and condominiums, and manufactured housing. Housing types shall allow for a variety of price ranges to meet the needs of low, medium, and high-income groups. Staff believe that these proposed amendments are consistent with the comprehensive plan policy number 9. Policy 16, new standards shall consider flexibility for lot sizes, setbacks, accessory residential uses on the same lot, parking, alleyways, and other development features. These proposed amendments are consistent with the Comprehensive Plan 16 by providing a flexibility by reducing our lot sizes for duplexes and townhomes so they may be developed on a wider range of lots. Proposed amendments will also provide flexibility for development of ADUs by removing unnecessary or overly restrictive requirements. So in terms of discussion, so I did attach, or at least include in your staff report, or attach to your staff report, the Housing Needs Analysis Code amendments, which is the last document that was prepared by Angelo Planning Group. It does give a strike-through showing our current code and what amendments or changes would be made. All the proposed amendments are subject to revision or deletion. The commission will forward this recommendation on the amendments to the city council, and then the final decision of the proposed amendments, as stated before, will be made by the city council. Staff's recommendation is that the planning commission recommend to the council approval of these amendments as shown in the attached memorandum entitled Housing Needs Assessment Analysis Code Amendments, City of the Dalles, with any additional changes from the commission. So I'm going to actually pass this on to Matt Hasty from Angelo Planning Group. If you have any questions of staff before I step away.
How do we plan on dealing with the comments that we've received?
So what, do you think we should read them into the record,
No, I
or?
think I don't believe you need to read them in the record, they'll be accepted. If you want to comment on them during your discussion, you can, or ask any questions.
Well, we really haven't had time to digest them per se at this point. So I
At
would
some point, take a recess, I guess, and review them if you felt you needed to do that.
I don't know, I think it would be, to me, it would be helpful if the planning department itself would give us a hint as we go through this as to how these comments would impact the document we're looking at for approval.
Okay. So in regards to the Fair Housing Council's letter dated August 2nd, the letter was submitted jointly by and I'm going to just kind of paraphrase some of the things here as well as read some of the items, was submitted jointly by the Housing and Land Advocates and the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. Both are nonprofit organizations that advocate for land use policies and practices to ensure that adequate and appropriate supply of affordable housing for all Oregonians. Basically, their comments that they have made, the amended staff report that I provided you gave a little bit more detail as what they were looking for in terms of specific details and percentages, and that also dealt with providing the affordable housing component. So that's kind of to paraphrase what they were looking for.
So, I have a question.
Sure.
So on the second page, the second paragraph down, that paragraph, could you explain what they're getting at there? You might read it.
Okay, so second paragraph on page 2 of the letter states, in particular, this is an opportunity to dig back into the housing needs assessment and make findings showing that the goals and information are being applied through the proposed code amendments. In this way, the city will start to meaningfully track the goals in the HNA, Housing Needs Assessment, with its subsequent land use actions. For example, increasing density within zones by lowering minimum lot sizes might accomplish some of the goals in the HNA, but on reading the staff report, all can be observed is that more housing is better, and that is not enough to meet Goal 10. Instead, the finding should explain in words that rely on the HNA how things change will result in increased density to achieve the goals in the HNA. To do otherwise is the start of allowing an HNA to gather dust when it has only just been written. So with that, the amendments or additions that I've added to the Goal 10 housing should be addressing, they wanted some specific details.
So that's why those amendments
That
were
is
there.
correct,
Oh,
yes.
okay,
Sorry.
got it. Okay.
And their letter is pretty accurate, is very accurate. I did not give that level of detail, and I guess that was definitely my error in doing that, or in not providing that. We have the information in the housing needs assessment, I just did not incorporate and pull that actually into the staff report.
Okay.
The email that we received from Tennyson Engineering, who is from Bimbasita, who is the engineer for Chenoweth Water PUD, states, I'm writing this email on behalf of Chenoweth Water PUD. The district manager and I have reviewed the discussed proposed ZOA 97-18 Housing Code amendments. Chenoweth Water supports these efforts to streamline the development process in the city and UGB. We hope that the Planning Commission passes the proposed amendments. Thanks, Ben. And then the last packet, we do have, it's a mix of information that we've received not only, or excuse me, that Angelo Planning Group was sent via a letter and a couple of faxes, and it has some various information regarding from Ms. Laureen Hunt regarding concerns about ADUs. Owner occupancy wanted to remain, she wanted owner occupancy to remain. Concerns regarding the standard units per acre in the RL zone, felt that there was other inconsistencies or problems that were not addressed. Felt that there was an importance of retaining owner occupancy with an ADU. And this I'm reading from her letter on May 30th. Dialogue with citizens has not been invited. In fact, it's been discouraged. A very well-concerned person having told the city planning office at the May 17th meeting to adopt current rulings into official code, not to discuss any planned changes of the code, which was disturbing. She also stated that the city does not respond in good faith to citizen input or involvement. Talking about a development application that we had previously before you. Underlined an opportunity still exists to recognize the importance of local citizens, especially those citizens living near proposed developments that do not meet city code and does not meet approval of neighbors. She wanted to explain realization of Goal 1, Oregon State Planning Goals, citizen involvement, citizens to be involved in all phases of the planning process, who believes a public hearing at the end of a proposal stage meets the standard, particularly taking into account public hearings reported in another document that I'm not sure we have. The fax has some comments about, again, about housing needs assessment, minimum lot size area, incentivizing development on larger sized lots. She did state that production of more affordable, smaller units seems a reasonable goal, but the emphasis on solving this with RL zone cornered lot duplexes is curious, because it would seem noted that the housing and residential land needs assessment has traditionally experienced low-density development. A little bit more detail in terms of infill, multifamily, ADUs, concerns regarding our housing amendments, again for ADUs. Detail regarding a hearing that was on, it looks like a letter written on June 25th, 2018. Talked about another application that was heard before you and Planning Commission, or in City Council. Similar concerns, specifics regarding that actual application more so than the specific housing code amendments. The fax dated 6/1. Also included citizen input concerns, citizen involvement.
Don,
Yes.
is this a petition? There's a whole lot of signatures on this.
It's the same information that was presented at the,
At one of the hearings, right? So this is
And so these
it's already been
signatures
submitted
were,
for application, for the applications, for the appeals, for Jonathan Blum's applications. So not specifically to this zoning ordinance amendment application. It would-
It wouldn't necessarily apply to what we're talking about tonight.
That's correct. However, there are some concerns regarding some of the changes that are going to be made from this applicant and her reference point is the application that was in her neighborhood. And I think that kind of summarizes, I think we're looking at, yeah, pretty much ADUs, lot sizes, and infill in existing residential neighborhoods. It's kind of some of the major concerns. I think that the letter writer is actually here tonight. I'm not sure if she'll be providing additional testimony to what was sent to Angela Planning Group.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. Ready? Okay, I'm going to pass the baton to Matt. Yay, he's ready.
We'll need a moment or two for the, yeah, that's fine.
I know, there's a lot. There's two piles of things.
Did everyone see? All right.
All right, good evening. Thanks for having me here again tonight. Good to see you all again. So I'm going to walk through the proposed amendments themselves. Because you all reviewed these in the previous work sessions, a lot of this is going to be repeats, so bear with me. I'll try not to repeat the things that Dawn said too much. And feel free to ask me questions as I go through at the end.
That would include questions from the audience also.
Well, I think that happens during testimony, I assume, and this is just me making a presentation to you all. That's,
How do you want to deal with that? Either Steve or,
Well, I think Matt's suggestion is appropriate.
yeah, I'm assuming questions from you rather than testimony from the audience,
okay, well
but
then
I don't
we
know.
through, we,
This is a hearing, not a work session, correct? So, yeah, so that's my assumption. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to make it easier for me to see this thing. So this is just a little background, and Dawn's really already covered this. You know, these amendments are proposed to meet a number of the recommendations in the HNA, the housing needs analysis, but not all of them. It's sort of a subset of them. And this is just, again, a summary of some of the key findings in the housing needs analysis. I'm not going to repeat these. I think Dawn really covered this pretty well in her presentation and in the staff report as well. So in terms of the code amendments themselves, there's several things that are being proposed. There's a number of proposed amendments to standards associated with accessory dwelling units, as well as some changes associated with duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, and those are all essentially reductions in minimum lot sizes per unit or in total for those types of development. There are some changes in provisions related to residential care facilities. This in particular is to comply with state law that requires that those types of uses be allowed in any zone that single-family residential uses are allowed in. I'll talk more about all of these. I'm just a quick summary. There are some proposed changes in your neighborhood compatibility standards that also have to do with satisfying state requirements for clear and objective standards. And then finally, there is a proposed change, which is essentially a resolution which allows for expedited review of what are called qualifying affordable housing projects. So that's, again, to comply with recent state legislation that requires that expedited review process for statutorily defined affordable housing projects. Whoops, sorry about that. This is just a little summary on kind of what is an accessory dwelling unit. And it's essentially, it's an additional dwelling unit on a lot with another dwelling unit already there. They tend to be smaller than the primary unit, and essentially accessory to. And the proposal here is to update a number of specific standards associated with ADUs. This is sort of a summary of those changes with your existing code requirements side by side, the proposed changes. So currently you allow one per lot, and that is consistent with what the state requires. The state has provided some guidance in terms of recommendations for other accessory dwelling unit requirements or provisions, and a number of these are essentially consistent with those state requirements. So in terms of the number, the proposal is to allow, continue to just allow one unit in the RL zone, but in other zones, the RM and the RH zone, to allow two. One of those would be essentially interior to or physically attached to the existing unit. The other could be a separate standalone structure. There's a proposed change in size. The current standard is that they cannot be larger than 600 square feet or 60% of the size of the primary unit. The proposal is for that size limit to increase to 800 square feet or 75% of the size of the primary unit, whichever is smaller. So really they couldn't be larger than 800 square feet, with one exception. That would be an interior ADU that's essentially a basement. So if the basement's larger than 800 feet, up to 1,000 square feet, it could be larger than 800 square feet. Let's see, there are some standards that say currently that the entrance needs to be oriented towards the primary unit. We're suggesting some changes to that, but that would also essentially help address privacy issues, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And right now you don't have any specific setbacks for accessory dwelling units, so you could conceivably have an accessory dwelling unit in front of the primary unit if that primary unit was set back far enough. And the proposal here is to change that so that the accessory unit is set back at least as far as the front facade or the front edge of the primary unit. And then right now you have some language about the accessory dwelling units being generally compatible in design with the primary unit. That really doesn't meet the state's requirement for clear and objective standards, so the proposal there is to essentially remove that compatibility requirement. It's not always going to generate a sort of an aesthetically pleasing unit either, depending on the design of the primary unit. So we just think it's better not to have that provision in there. And then finally, you currently require that at least one of the units be owner occupied, and the proposal is to eliminate that requirement. And I'll talk about all these in a little bit more detail, or at least some of them. In terms of, again, the recommendation in terms of number of units, so if a second ADU is proposed in the RM or RH zone, it would have to go through an administrative approval and could be elevated to a quasi-judicial action and appealed to the Planning Commission. So it's not just a done deal on that for that second ADU. We've got some provisions in place here to deal with any appeal to that decision. Just some comments about the owner occupancy provision and the rationale for eliminating that provision. One, there's an enforcement issue. That's a very difficult thing to enforce. Somebody sells the main house, there's already an ADU there, or they decide to rent the main dwelling, there's already an ADU there. You don't know there's no way for you to find out necessarily or to monitor that that's going on. You could through sort of a complaint-driven process, but it's just it's a difficult thing to monitor and enforce, so that's one of the rationales here. There are some issues associated with financing of an ADU that are complicated by that owner occupancy provision. There's some more information in previous memos on that. And it's also essentially inconsistent with how you regulate ownership of other forms of housing like duplexes or even really single-family homes. You don't currently say those have to be owner-occupied in general. You don't currently say that duplexes, that both units have to be owner-occupied. So the owner occupancy provision, we feel, is sort of inconsistent with other provisions and has some other drawbacks, and so that's the rationale there for that. This shows you what's being proposed in terms of this privacy standard. Essentially, if you have, what's being proposed is if you have windows on a side of an ADU that's facing an adjacent property, that those windows need to be above 6 feet above the floor of the unit, whether it's on the first floor or second floor. You'd need to have them above that floor so that it's difficult for somebody to be looking down into or across into the neighbor's house. Or if they're on the first floor, have a site obscuring hedge or fence. So that's kind of in place of the previous provision and really, I would say, goes beyond it in terms of not requiring that the entrance be adjacent, be facing the primary dwelling entrance, but doing some other things to address privacy issues associated with ADUs. Maximum size, I've really, I think, already talked about this. There's some additional information here just about kind of what you see nationally in terms of apartment sizes to compare those to ADUs. And essentially, again, we're recommending that you increase the minimum size to 800 square, or the maximum size to 800 square feet from 600. If you kind of look at what other communities have done across the state, that's pretty typically what they require. 600 is pretty low compared to other communities around the state. So that's the recommendation there, and that's consistent with the statewide guidance on this issue from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. That just shows you some images of some ADUs that are essentially 800 square feet or smaller. So just to give you a sense of what that looks like. So that's it on the ADUs and the provisions or recommendations there. Talk just a little bit about duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes. This first slide really just kind of talks about the rationale, which again, Dawn did a very good job of covering in her staff report and in her opening presentation, so I won't repeat all that. This slide shows the proposed changes. So in the, or actually this shows the existing, not the proposed changes, but your existing standards and proposed. Sorry about that. Okay, so this one I cannot see over there, so I'm going to have to turn my head. Sorry about that. So in the RL zone, essentially duplexes would only be allowed on corner lots, and the proposed size for a duplex would be reduced from 4,500 square feet per unit to 2,500 square feet per unit. I'll talk about kind of the rationale for that in a moment. In the RM zone, there would be no change to the minimum lot size for townhomes. It's proposed to reduce the minimum size for a duplex from 6,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet, and for a triplex from 8,000 to 7,500 square feet. So those are fairly modest changes, I would say, in the RM zone, and I would say the same thing in the RH zone. Reducing townhomes from 2,800 to 2,500 square feet per unit. That's pretty typical to what you see across the state in terms of size limits for attached single-family or townhomes, row houses, and duplexes going from 5,000 to 4,000, triplexes from 8 to 6. So essentially for those types, and those are really consistent with the density you allow, and actually a little lower than the density you allow for multifamily units in those same zones, in the RM and RH zones. And really that's sort of the point of this to some degree, is to reduce barriers for duplexes, triplexes, put them on somewhat of a more equal footing with multifamily housing, because in a lot of cases, that's going to be more compatible with the surrounding character of development. And so you might see more of this in terms of infill development and less of some larger developments. So that's part of the rationale here. Just kind of highlighting the changes. I've got a few images here. You saw these at the last work session we had that just show you examples of kind of how these standards would play out in terms of the sizes that are being proposed and what that might look like on a lot here. There's no proposed changes to lot coverage standards, to setbacks. There is one to landscaping, which I'll talk about in a moment. But for the most part, you'd still have to meet all those other standards, parking, et cetera. No changes to any of those things. It's really just to the minimum lot size. So that's an image of a duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot on a corner. I talked about this already. It's just highlighting the proposed change there. This is, again, another image of the duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot. Highlighted that already as well. That's an image of a duplex on a 4,000 square foot lot, which is what's proposed in the RH zone. Let's see, that we've seen. There's one other change proposed associated with your duplex, triplex standards, and it's specifically for triplexes. Currently, you require 1.5 times the area of the footprint of the dwelling to be devoted to open space, and that's really higher than what you require for any similar form of housing in that zone. And we think that creates a potential barrier to being able to develop that type of housing in that zone. So the recommendation is to essentially, instead of requiring 1.5 times the amount of land, to just make it similar to your other standards and require 100%, rather than 150% of that be devoted to landscaping. So that one I think is pretty straightforward. You still would say that you need to landscape all of the undeveloped areas of the front yard. That wouldn't change. Again, just some more images of some of these building types consistent with the standards that are being proposed. And then this I've essentially talked about already, but this is related to the residential care home facility. Right now, that is only allowed as an accessory use in a number of your zones. That's really not consistent with what the state requires. So the proposal is to allow that as an outright use rather than an accessory use. Because accessory to it would be very strange, frankly, to have that be an accessory to primary residential use. So that's kind of I'm going to call that kind of a cleanup thing for your code. Neighborhood compatibility standards. As I said, the state requires that all standards related to housing, needed housing, and that really is essentially all housing, be clear and objective, or at least that you have a clear and objective standards track. You have, and we, as part of the housing needs analysis project, we looked at your code, we examined it to make sure we felt like, yes, you're meeting that standard. When we looked at your neighborhood compatibility standards, there's some language in there that we did not feel was clear and objective, and so we're recommending some changes to address that. And so currently, there's some standards that just talk about the design of the house has to be generally compatible with the stuff around it. We're recommending some specific changes to add standards that are really clear and measurable, that try to essentially get at the same intent or purpose. We're not trying to change the intent of what your current standards do. We're trying to make them measurable and clear so that you don't look at those, somebody comes in with something and they say, well, it's compatible, and you go, well, I'm not really sure it is. So this is to help you and your staff and development applications or development applicants move through the process and know what the standards are. I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail, but they relate to trim, porches, roof lines, et cetera, as a way, again, to require that compatibility, but do it in a clearer way. And then finally, and I'm getting towards the end of my PowerPoint here, This is just about that expedited permitting process for affordable housing. Again, it only applies per the recent legislation to what are called qualifying developments, so that's multifamily. It has to have at least 50% of the units affordable to households with incomes below 60% of median family income, and the units have to be affordable through some kind of mechanism for 60 years. So pretty focused on what types of developments this would apply to. And it essentially requires that the permitting timeline for those developments be 120 days rather than or instead of the current 120 days that's in place for really all land use application process around the state. So it cuts 20 days off of that process. So this is proposed essentially to be done through a resolution. Your code essentially already complies, but it doesn't do so explicitly. So this just talks about the fact you already have some similar provisions in your enterprise zone, and we're proposing you essentially use those same provisions to meet this requirement, meet the standard of the law for those affordable housing developments as well. That's it from me. Again, apologies for the duplication, but hopefully that was helpful, and happy to answer any questions from all of you. And actually I'll say a couple more quick things because Don said I would and I forgot. So as Don said, we had a public meeting about a week and a half ago, yeah. And that was partly at the request of all of you. You know, when we were having the work sessions with you previously, one of the things we heard from you was we'd really like to hear from some other folks in the community. Those work sessions were open to the public, and people could have come in, and people did come in. There wasn't a lot of testimony. So we said, you know, let's have a public meeting that's really more of an informal opportunity to present this information and give people a chance to tell us what they think of this. So we had this meeting. It was essentially kind of an open house kind of format, but we did a presentation at the front end. There were 9 people at the meeting. Commissioner Nelson was there, among others. And I'm going to try to sort of characterize what I think we heard and kind of about how many people said what. And then I'd love to have you give me your take, Commissioner Nelson, if you have, particularly if you think I didn't get it quite right. Okay. But again, 9 folks there. I would say 2 of the people there expressed concerns and some opposition to some of the things that we're proposing tonight, particularly the lot sizes for duplexes on corner lots in the RL zone specifically. The owners getting rid of or eliminating the ownership provision requirement for ADUs, and allowing more than one ADU on a lot. Those were kind of the, although they, I think, told me that they would be most concerned about that if that were the case in the RL zone, less concerned in the RM and RH, and that's actually where we're proposing to allow that. So there were those concerns expressed. I would say there were a couple folks there who really I did not hear them take a position on anything one way or the other. They just seemed to come to listen and or want to have some more information. And then I would say the other 5 folks there were generally supportive of what's being proposed. I talked to a number of them. Either owned property and said, yeah, you know, it'd be great if there were less barriers to us developing an ADU. That's something they were interested in some cases for themselves to live in down the road. And or they said, you know, this is a good idea. This will help meet a community need. They cited the very tight rental market here and barriers to just folks with moderate incomes finding housing that's affordable to them, whether it's ownership or rental housing. And I think particularly rental housing in this community, they said was difficult to come by, and their opinion was sort of anything that could help with that is good, and they thought these were reasonable approaches to do that. So that's how I would characterize what I heard at that meeting. And again, Commissioner Nelson or Steve or Don, if anybody has anything to add, I'd be happy to hear that.
I think there was a little bit of concern about taking away the old regulation of having the homeowner, the property owner, not necessary for constructing an ADU. So
Yeah, that was-
That was another thing that was expressed.
Yep, that was one of the concerns from the two folks who were concerned and/or opposed to some of these things. That was one of the things that they mentioned being concerned about. Yeah,
And other than that, I think you got it right on.
thank you.
You're welcome.
So again, that's it from me. I can come back up after you've had public testimony. I think if there's additional questions that you might have for me to address anything you hear. I thought Don did a good job of summarizing the testimony that you received so far, having reviewed most of that myself. And I would also just reiterate what she said, which is that the amended staff report really does address the comments from the Housing Land Advocates and the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. They really have a sort of a policy objective of making sure that cities, when they go through these types of processes, are addressing statewide goal 10 and their findings and are tying their actions back to findings from their housing needs analyses. So they are looking at these actions in any city around the state, and that's kind of their focus. And they're making sure, one, that you're tying it to the housing needs analysis and that you're being consistent with the housing needs analysis and that you're not doing something that would impact or be inconsistent with the fair housing law. And they didn't have any comments that these things would. They just said you need to do a better job of tying this to the statewide goal in your housing needs analysis. And again, I think Don's amended staff report does a really good job of that. So now I will stop talking. And any questions for me before I sit down?
I guess not.
All right, well, thank you.
So that concludes the staff presentation, this particular item. So do you anticipate that we'll open it up for questions from the audience or the commission, or what are you expecting?
Yeah, you'd actually be asking for public
Public comment.
testimony from the public,
Okay.
or questions if they have questions.
Does anyone wish to ask questions or testify? Okay, we'd like to have you give us your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Lorraine Penn, Post Office Box 81, The Dells. And I'm just going to address three things. One, I'll just do a handout. But the first thing that it addressed was public involvement. And the statement was that there were 2 public meetings and an open house. And for the 2 public meetings, my husband and I were here for both of them. And I still have an agenda for that. There was no opportunity to say anything. And a person from who's very concerned about things had written a whole page, and I'm going to hand that out today. But I would say that public involvement has been like minimal to almost none at all. So, and we were there on both of those. And then the open house, there were a handful of people there. And an agenda, I tried to find one. Agenda wasn't even available. You had to go to the office to the city to get one, and I tried to pass them out, and I got 2 passed out, and then that was it. But it's been very hard to get information, just even about what's happening, what's coming, what's happening. And so just about public involvement. We've done a lot of research on things, and this is a whole section on the Oregon Statewide Planning Goals and Guidelines, citizen involvement. I mean, it just has all kinds of stuff in there. So I'm just going to lay it down. And so here's the agenda, and we went to this May 17 meeting, and we sat back the whole time, and we had this thing ready to hand out, but we weren't recognized or given a chance. So public involvement, I would say 0 there, 0. So really, public involvement has been very limited. So I mean, I'm just showing you that. And today we couldn't find, 2 people told me, and one called me, and I talked to another one, couldn't find an agenda for tonight. So I mean, it's like, there's that. And then I want to express an interest in, and for the neighborhood, an interest in some things that happen in Beaverton. So listen to what happened in Beaverton, and then see if something like this can happen in the Dalles to involve the public. They had an online survey in which over 500 people participated to change the code in their neighborhood. I mean, that's astounding. And there were just like a handful of people in our community meeting. I wouldn't call that a community meeting. I'd call that like a handful of, and some of those weren't even like from the community. They were part of, the city thing. So it's just astounding to me that can happen in a neighborhood. Why not something like that here? And engagement with neighborhood groups. Neighborhood groups. Groups in neighborhoods where things are going to be changing, like the RL neighborhood. Talk to the people from that neighborhood to get what they want. And it says 2 persons were there representing, 2 persons were there. These persons are representing a whole neighborhood. And there was, I'll get to that next. I won't say that. But anyhow, and it said there was an interactive map and summary of proposed changes. And they allowed people to submit comments and a testimony online. So there are a lot of ways to include the public in making these changes that affect the whole city. I suggest you look at those and just choose one. For instance, an online survey in which 500 people have participated. Do one of these instead of none, just to help the public be involved. So I'm really concerned about citizen involvement. A lot of people are, not just me, but I'm speaking for a lot of people. Okay, that's enough about that public involvement. The second one is the corner duplex. And you saw that they were recommending 4,500. The allowed amount now on which you can build the duplex is 4,500 square feet per unit. And a neighborhood has already dealt with this, and it was changing. There was an adjustment, a hearing about an adjustment, where it changed from 4,500 to 3,737 feet. And the neighborhood categorically did not accept it. And you have it that there was a whole page of signatures and 2 half pages. So citizens have already spoken about this particular proposal in that neighborhood, and I'm suggesting that they be heard. So these 2 persons that were there at the community meeting were representing a whole neighborhood that have already spoken about this particular proposal. And now they're proposing for it to go down to 2,500 square feet per unit, when 3,737 wasn't acceptable to the whole RL neighborhood. Seriously, I mean, it's mind-boggling to think about this. So that's already been tested and tried in a neighborhood. All these people have spoken out, and it can either be, they can be listened to, or they can be, shoved under the rug, whatever that has been done. So I wanted to suggest that 2,500 square feet, well, if a whole neighborhood says 3,700 square feet, and I suggested that the Angelo Planning Group drive down 13th Street from Cherry Heights to Walnut Street and look at the properties, and then look at that corner duplex and see, does it belong in that neighborhood? Just look at it. It's mind-boggling if you do that, just to see it. And that's 3,737, and then it's going to be changed to 2,500. I mean, people in the neighborhood say, this doesn't even belong there. So I'm seriously saying, go do something about this and listen to the people that have already spoken. It's just me speaking for them. And the third one is, here's what was written after the first hearing on May the 3rd. This was done in cooperation with 2 neighborhoods. And then they got signatures. So that's what you have, the signatures from just our neighborhood. There was another neighborhood that had signatures too. But the neighborhoods are cooperating and getting together. Citizens are getting involved because they care about what's happening. And are they being listened to? I mean, the results can tell you that. And that decision made by the city has been appealed to the Land Use Development Board at the state level, because it doesn't follow city code, and I think that'll be easy to say, but we have to go through steps to be heard. That's what's happening. That's kind of sad, actually. The last thing is ADUs. And in terms of density, this is from your from the City of the Dalles Housing Strategies Report on page 38. It says, when you're going to change density, it says it should be done in concert with additional community engagement. The community has already been engaged. That whole neighborhood was engaged. They spoke loudly and clearly. And so, I mean, that's already happened, but what are the results of that? I mean, I think that really needs to be taken into consideration. A few people at the community meeting, it wasn't advertised well, we couldn't get an agenda. That doesn't tell us anything. This meeting doesn't tell us anything. But people spoke when something came to their neighborhood. I mean, they spoke loudly and clearly. So about ADUs, I'm not going to speak on that myself. I just have one more thing, and then I'm going to pass something out about ADUs, and you can read that, so that I don't want to go into that, because I've talked enough about 2 other things. But this is something that I'm just going to pass out. It's what somebody else wrote. It's a commentary on page 18 about ADUs. So I'll just pass this out, and I don't know if there are enough copies, but you can just spread them around. I didn't know I was going to be doing this, because I wasn't sure there was going to be public comment, because the agenda doesn't say there is. But thank you. This is really nice to be able to do it, to have an opportunity to share. There's not enough for everybody, and so if I need to make more copies, that's not. But somebody else did that who's very concerned about this, about the ADUs and how they fit in and what it says in the comprehensive planning goal. I mean, so much work has been done. And the last comment, so those are the 3 things I was going to address. Public involvement, the corner duplexes, how a whole neighborhood has already rejected 3,700 square feet, and here's a proposal to reduce up to 2,500 square feet. I mean, the people have spoken. And so it says in your City of the Dalles Housing Strategies Report, it says the Dalles has, on page 36 of 116, it says the Dalles has ample mid-density and high-density residential zoned land. Ample mid-density and high-density residential zoned land, but these areas have traditionally experienced low-density development. In order to accommodate future housing need within current boundaries, some increase in density will likely be required in areas where it is allowed. So it's allowed in certain areas, the RM and the RH areas. And then on page 17, in the City of the Dalles Housing Report, that came from the Housing and Residential Land Needs Assessment, I'm sorry, page 36. So then in the City of the Dalles Housing Strategies Report on page 17, it says, in the RH and RM zones, revised development standards, this is the recommendation, revised development standards to permit infill in the RH and RM zones. And there's so much talk about infill in the RL zones. And it says right here, in the RM and RH zones, revised development standards to permit infill. And so why is there so much emphasis in the RL zone when here it says do it in the other zones? And I could bring other things up, which tells about the purpose of the RL zones, but I won't. Because it's in the city code and people should be able to read it there. So thank you very much. I hope my citizen involvement was acceptable. But it speaks for a lot of people who are very concerned about it.
So the document that she handed out was faxed to Angela Planning. It's in the 8-2 fax that went out, so that's.
Oh, so they have it already, is that it?
Correct.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm just making sure everybody has it. Okay.
Good for you.
That's about ADUs and how it can be looked at in a very different way from what's happening. And that's the other thing, in the ADUs, the owner occupancy, a suggestion was made in the last meeting. Why not keep it in the RM and RH zones where, and just keep the owner occupancy in the RL zone and then allow a change in the RM and RH zones? That would be a reasonable thing to do too. And there are reasons, and it's on that ADU sheet. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to state for the record that the 2 Planning Commission meetings where you discussed this item in your workshops were properly noticed. They were public meetings and the public was invited to comment. The public workshop that was held on July 19th was also properly noticed. There was also agendas available at that meeting.
Does anyone else wish to testify or ask questions?
Can I make a suggestion, an amendment to that, what you just said? Is that possible?
I don't know.
I'm just asking.
I'm not sure it's needed at this point.
Okay, but something was inaccurate, but I'll let it.
I have a question, sir.
Yes. Would you come up to the microphone, please?
I'm
Give us
sorry.
your name and address for the record, please.
Dalia Thompson, D-A-L-I-E-A, and 724 East 20th.
Thank you.
I appreciated hearing all the information about the ADU, but I wanted to point out, a lot of these newer homes being built, they already have those built in, mother-in-law apartments. In fact, I have several friends that have those built in as a feature. So I guess my question is, because we're looking at our future, my father and other folks, and myself even, what's gonna happen to me when I get older? Is the city gonna look at that as well? with these brand-new structures that are being built? Are you gonna make, I mean, can they not sell them? What are we, you know what I'm saying? There's some other pieces. So I'm like, well, maybe I don't wanna have a house like that built. I can't sell it. So anyways, I just wondered if this is also taking into account the new homes that are being built with these mother-in-law apartments.
So just to kind of touch on that, we have heard that. That's not something new. Right now, accessory dwelling units are actually permitted outright as a secondary or accessory use. The limitations are that a primary, either the homeowner lives in either residence, either the accessory or the primary, and it's limited to 600 square feet or 60% of the gross floor area of the primary structure. So what we're looking at doing, so that's already permitted. It's permitted, it's an accessory use. We do allow it. What we're looking at is expanding that square footage allowance, removing the homeowner occupancy. And what we've run into is in the past, a house sells and somebody buys it that doesn't have a mother-in-law or a family member to move in, or they buy it as an investment property and they want to rent out the 2 units. So what ends up happening is the appraiser calls the planning department to verify that there are 2 viable units there. Most of the time, we state that there is a single-family residence there with an accessory dwelling unit and state that one of them has to be owner-occupied. That becomes an enforcement issue for us. So in a sense, it is a viable accessory dwelling unit. However, we are a complaint-driven office, so it's very difficult for us to even go out and check or know if somebody's moved in, moved out, they don't have the need for a family member to live there anymore, and they rent out both units. So it's kind of clearing it up or making it a little bit easier for us because it's really hard to enforce. And then it's actually opening it up so that you can have different ownership situations and not allow or not require limiting it just to somebody who owns it, and it has to be that they have to live in one of the units.
And how is it enforced?
So, yeah, so we are complaint-driven.
What happens to us? Do we
So-
go to jail? I mean,
So I think that's a great question, and that is where we're at in terms of what kind of enforcement will we have? Do we shut down that accessory dwelling unit? Do we kick the person out? It just kind of, and then what we're doing as a planning department is we're removing a viable residential unit that could be rented out or used and create some infill in our community. So it's really, we're kind of in a little bit of a, I don't want to say gray area, but it's difficult.
Are we suggesting that these LUDO changes, though, make that
Yes.
situation easier?
Yes, so these amendments that we're proposing today will actually eliminate the ownership requirement, which will then allow that to not really be a problem.
But then in that case, isn't it just a duplex?
You could, I mean, the only thing is that you have the limitation on size. So a duplex doesn't have the limitation on square footage
So it is operating then as a duplex?
as a secondary accessory dwelling unit. Second unit.
I'm going to just add to that. Duplexes are defined very specifically in your code. They have to have separate electrical water meters. So the situation we're describing would not have that. So they would not be equivalent to a duplex in terms of how they are treated in your code. Again, your code requires that the accessory unit be below a certain size. There's not that same requirement for duplexes. So they would be functioning as a second unit, but not equivalent to a duplex, I would say. You know, I mean, yes, they function as another unit, but you would not call it a duplex. It's not how your code
Limitations.
defines a duplex in terms of the limitations on accessory dwelling units.
And size as well as utilities also.
Yes?
They wouldn't be duplex, but they would be rental units. So the rental units would be able to be anywhere, so duplex is.
We need to get you on the record first.
Yes, they wouldn't be duplexes, but they would be
You
rental
need
units.
to state your name and.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Lorraine Hunt, Post Office Box 81, The Dalles. That they wouldn't be duplexes, but they would be rental units. And so rental units would be not only limited to corner duplexes in the RL zone, but then they could be anywhere. And that's a problem. It's one of the things addressed in that ADU thing. So to call them rental units instead of duplexes is the accurate thing.
I just want to make an observation. Today, we hired a new person at the chamber, and so today we were looking for housing for him. And I went to one of the rental sites. I went to actually a couple of them. And there were 6 one-bedroom units on one rental company site. They're all number 2 or B units. I would bet you dollars to donuts, every single one of those is an unpermitted ADU. Because that's, so there's like what, and then, so I'm thinking, okay, no, all right, that's interesting. So they are already, I think in many cases, they're already being rented, it's already happening. We just have put the city and the planning department in a really crazy situation of, so what do we do now? What, do I complain about all 6 of those to find out if they're unpermitted ADUs? That would,
Those are not separate buildings, they're within.
they're
a single
within,
building, Right,
A house.
which is already permitted.
only if it's owner occupied.
Correct.
And I will guarantee you, these are not owner occupied.
I've seen many of those.
Yeah, so it's kind of a, it's a horrible place to be, because I think it says, it is occurring. And I think we discussed that before, that we don't foresee actually much of a change of the number of them that's going to happen because of the changes that we're making to clarify things. We're just removing some language that doesn't serve. So the ADUs are a problem. I was shocked this morning when it's like, oh my God, that's on the agenda tonight. I know exactly what those are. Anyway, it was very interesting that it was such a huge illustration of, oh, that's what those are.
I think it's important to note that the intent of this, the amendments, is to bring our regulations into compliance with state law and to encourage development in needed areas. That's what I think is important to remember. We're not trying to have a hearing on who wants what. We're trying to have a hearing on how to bring our regulations into compliance with state law and how to encourage development in a manner that meets current standards.
Thank you. Really important point because,
Name and address
well,
again.
I'm sorry.
Because the tape doesn't see who you are. So we need to.
Excuse me, I just forget, I'm even all. Lorraine Hunt, Post Office Box 81. He's exactly right, and that's why it's important to note that in your Dallas Housing Strategies Report, there are so many optional, things that are optional, including the ADU thing and the increasing density. Just look on page 38, all the things that are optional. You don't have to do these things to meet state law. There's flexibility, it's optional. And the ADUs, do it in RM and RH. I mean, make those changes, but in RL, there are really good reasons not to, and it's on that sheet. So be flexible about how you do it, and so that it makes sense in an area for different reasons. So I'm just letting you know, meet state law, but when it's optional, you don't have to do it. You can be flexible and meet the needs of neighborhoods. Thanks.
Anyone else would wish to testify or ask questions?
Sure.
Give us your name and address for the record, please.
A little low for me.
If you were 5 foot, you would.
My name is Jonathan Blum. I reside at 403 East 8th Street here in the Dalles. And I just wanted to echo the comments of one of the other participants in the discussion this evening, that I'm very supportive of the changes that the Planning Commission is considering. I think they're long overdue. As this gentleman here said earlier, that these are sort of the low-hanging fruit that it will take to bring our city land use ordinance up to a level that's similar to both what the state requires, but also what you'll find in other places similar to the Dalles and Oregon State. And I think if the city wishes to have further development in this town that will make housing prices less expensive for families that are struggling, more housing available. There's been a lot of discussion in the town recently about homelessness. And that affects me personally because I see people and I wish that they had housing. And I think a lot of people in the community feel that way. And connecting the dots between the price of housing, homelessness, and how much housing is available, like those things go together. And so proposing changes to the ordinance that allow better development to help address these kinds of difficult issues is really what we need to make this town a better place to live for everybody, not just for people who live in an RL zone or people who live in an RH zone, but for the whole community. And although there are folks who don't wish to see these changes in their neighborhood, these changes affect the whole community. And as a planning commission, it's your job to represent everyone in the town. And that includes the homeless people in the town. It includes the wealthiest people who live in the nicest neighborhoods. And you guys are given the task of making policy that does affect everybody. And so I think it's important you guys are making your decisions about what kinds of changes belong in this ordinance to look at the needs of the entire community. And hopefully you'll make changes that will help encourage development, that will help everybody. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Give us your name and address for the record, please.
John Windsor, 1916.
You might take the microphone out of there.
John Windsor, 1916 West 13th.
You can take it out of the stand if you want.
I come here, a lot of ignorance is what all this is about. I got high density, medium density, low density. And where I'm at is low density. And, I mean, all this stuff was zoned originally in these fashions. And I guess I'm trying to understand, are you guys trying to make amendments to change the low density to a higher density?
We're not changing the zones, no. We may change what the density might be in the zone.
So we're not changing the zone, and we're not changing density requirements or allowances that are stated in our comprehensive plan and our land use ordinance. What we're doing is taking away some additional barriers that would allow for infill strategies or infill development to happen in these areas. Across the city of the Dalles, we have the 3 residential zones, low, high, and medium, and those are all built at such low densities as to what they could potentially be currently. So what we're trying to do is provide a option to encourage some infill that hasn't been happening or hasn't already been constructed. So we're looking at we're not increasing the densities of those zones, but we're increasing the possibility to meet those density requirements.
I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I'm only focusing in on my area. I'm not sure what the other different zones, how they're set up or anything like that. But in our area, there's a lot of large square footage properties. And so, I mean, I guess that's what attracted us to that area. And really, I'm understanding you guys are going to make recommendations to whoever and give this, some thought, but I just, also understand that, we've moved, there's people living in this area because of the way it is. And to have, like there are pictures there with duplexes, and, 5 rooftops and all crammed in, and
You have to keep in mind that this is not something that's going to happen in 90 days or 100 days or maybe even 10, 20 years. This is something that will probably evolve over time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not like, saying, please don't do this. It's just, just consider, that, I guess, that opinion.
So, Mr. Windsor, just to kind of give you a little bit of information, the accessory dwelling units, which is to add a mother-in-law quarters in your property, has always been allowed. And, well, at least since '98, when we made the code changes to our land use portion, the number of applicants that have actually come in to do these secondary units, I can probably count on both of my hands. So similar, kind of echoing what Commissioner LaViere is stating, is that these changes aren't going to necessarily have an instant or have like a knee-jerk reaction. It's providing some flexibility. It could potentially impact you because a neighbor or you could choose to divide your parcel or add an ADU to your property. We're just kind of opening that up, so.
I'm just saying, if you went down 13th from Cherry Heights to Walnut on the south side with all the larger properties, if everybody chose to do that, it would be a major difference in what it is now.
Right
I
now-
just hate to see that, so.
So right now, the minimum lot size in your zone is actually 5,000 square feet, and I'm betting the properties along 13th are probably 3 to 10 times that size in terms of square footage.
Sure. Not that big. Anyway, thank you for listening.
My name's Vern Bido. I live at 1914 West 13th. I was going to hold my peace, but I agree with Mr. Blum. This does affect our whole community. I guess digressing a little bit, my mother-in-law needed a place to live. I'd probably find her someplace else, not at my house. Anyway. Anyway, going there. I, like Mr. Windsor, was attracted to the community. I've lived in the community for 50 years, so when you talk 6 months, a year, 20 years, I'm 50 years, and I've watched it change. And I watched it get worse as we go. We want to build housing for basically low income, people that aren't really fortunate and can't afford more expensive housing like I've got, like most of us in this room probably have. But then I look at it from the fact, how many of you have gone to Safeway or Fred Meyer's on a Saturday or a Sunday and tried to shop? How many of you have driven down 2nd Street or down 6th and Weber on an afternoon? I can remember when high density in town was 3 cars going either direction. Now it's clear back to Denny's, clear up to the nursing home sometimes. We really want to attract more people to the community at this point with these infrastructures in place. I don't think that makes good planning for our community. I really don't. I look back for a few years back, we had an incident where one of our local individuals who was developing downtown was involved in a nationwide scandal. And a comment was made by a nationwide publication that described the Dalles as a, let me get this right, a gritty little farming community with a ramshackle downtown business district. I didn't like that any better than anybody else. But when we look at it, that's what we are. We haven't got the infrastructure to attract a lot more people into our community. Go to Safeway, go to Fred Meyer's on Friday and Saturday and see what it is now. Need to think about this before we make these kind of changes. At least at this point, we need some other infrastructure in our communities before we do this. Before we put the small duplexes on a corner that aren't going to have any place for somebody to park, because that's going to affect us all. Thank you.
Did you want to say something?
At some point, I'll make a couple of clarifying comments, but I don't want to interrupt public testimony to do that. Maybe-
Well, you had the intent to get up and say something, so I'll
Okay.
give you the
So,
opportunity.
so my clarifying comment was just that the only change, proposed change here we're talking about that affects the RL zone is to reduce the minimum lot size for duplexes on corner lots. The changes to ADU standards don't increase the ability to build more ADUs in RL zones, so those have to do with the size of duplex, they have to do with how many you can build in RM and RH zones. They have to do with some of the compatibility standards, but not the number in the RL zones. I wanted to clarify that. So it really is just about, in terms of the impact on the RL zone, allowing duplexes to be built on smaller lots, essentially allowing a duplex on the same size lot as a single-family detached dwelling, only on corner lots in that zone. That's really the one thing that impacts the RL zone in terms of increasing the number of units beyond what you would allow now. And so I sort of spoke to the rationale for that earlier. I don't want to necessarily repeat that, but I did just want to clarify that point. All of the other proposed changes have to do with the RM and the RH zone in terms of the minimum lot sizes for duplexes and triplexes, and also for being able to do an additional ADU. And then the only other thing is the owner occupancy. All that really does is allow both of those units to be rented. And if you have a shortage of rental units, that increases the potential supply of rental units. I mean, that's very consistent with the findings of the housing needs analysis. I know there are people concerned about having both of those be rental units, but frankly, you need more rental units. And it doesn't change the character of the dwelling itself. It just changes who can be in there, how it can be sold or rented. So I just wanted to, again, kind of clarify that in terms of impacts on specific zones.
So what you're saying is it's not a new thing to be able to split a large lot into 5,000 square foot lot. And it's not a new thing to have an ADU. People can have that now under the present zoning regulations.
Okay.
I just want to make one more comment.
Just a second.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll be right with you. Okay, ADUs within a house. So let's say a basement, a garage, something of that nature. As Matt had said earlier, a duplex has separate water facilities or meters for each unit, where a house does not. So the tenants are splitting the water, they're splitting the sewer, they're splitting the power. In most cases, they're splitting the HVAC, they're splitting the heat costs, they're splitting everything. Having managed many of these type of units, it's a headache to do so if one of the people is not one of the owners of the building. Because if you own the building and you rent it out, you can deal with that renter a lot more effectively than having two separate renters that both want control of the heater, both want control of the air conditioning, both want it. It is an issue to deal with when they are not owner occupied. So, sorry.
My name's Leah Thompson, 724 East 20th. I just want to make, I'm going to make another comment. I actually disagree with you. I have several units that we have shared heating. I have an 11-plex that I have a boiler. So and they're all shared. My sister has other units that have been turned into duplexes, houses. You know, it probably is a hardship for some people. We seem to be okay with it. So I would just say I think that's a personal thing. I don't think that's an actual fact for a landlord. But I'm sure for some landlords it is kind of difficult. I'm obviously a proponent for the ADUs for my own personal reasons. I'd like to have one for my dad. I just wanted to mention, I grew up on West 13th, 2324 West 13th. And I felt very nostalgic listening to these two gentlemen talk about that neighborhood. I had lots of childhood memories there, went to Fork School of Dance. I actually was here testifying for the housing units that went on there because at that time City Council and the planning department didn't even want those because of the traffic. But I grew up during a time when there was tons of traffic. Everybody belonged to Fork School of Dance. Everyone. She had every student in this town. And there was just traffic all the time. I grew up on that street when there was a cherry orchard where many houses are now. I grew up on that street when there was nothing between us and the Oatses at the end of the street. Verdant was still a gravel road. And I grew up on that street when you used to be able to sled. There's been lots of development since then. Lots. And there's low-income folks there. There's high-income folks there. I love that neighborhood now because in a way it's integrated. So I would just urge you to consider that, and familiar with in this community, and it's not our fault necessarily, but it's the way the funding rolls, is we have sequestered all of our poor out to that west end of town, and that's driven down the property values for all of us. And what I also want to just reiterate is when we're looking at the development of ADUs or rentals or little houses, we're not talking about bringing in the poor or other people. We're talking about our own people, our own community. The person I housed in my home was a woman who lost her home and lived at one of those parks for 2 years, freezing. Clear out on the east end of the gorge. That wasn't somebody else's problem, that was ours. We have people that need housing. I have apartments. There are nice young people that would like to come into here to go to the wind tower training. But guess what? They don't have all the credit history and all the things that these property managers make them have in order to get a decent place to live. So I have people there saying, I will pay you $2,500 if I could just get a place to live. There's good, decent, kind people that need housing that are our own. And so I don't care if it's in a shoebox or, you know, if we can get clean, sustainable, decent housing and get people out of those terrible places. So if somebody here thinks that we don't need good housing, just go to the west end of town. Just go over there. You know, I have friends, I have family, and I know y'all do too. So if every single person here opened up one little corner of their house, we could probably get people into clean, decent, safe housing. And what that does for us is it takes people that are maybe faced with hopeless situations, puts them in positions where they can be more hopeful, and then they too become very productive. And I understand there's a balance. We need it all. I like high-end housing. I like medium-end housing. But what we don't have enough of is housing for people that need it, that are ours. So please, just keep that in mind, that we're talking about housing our own people. So I'm out of here because I'll just get wound up about it. But again, I love you all for addressing it. I just want you to know, I'm sorry I'm so late on it. I would have gone to every meeting. I want to tell you how much, as a citizen, I really appreciate the work. And I know it's not easy, so God bless you all.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
How is the community notified about the public hearings?
So we have requirements for, that they have to be published in the local newspaper. We also post these meetings on our city website. I believe we also post it on our Facebook page, which is maybe surprisingly not visited as much as we all would think it would be. So that's our requirement. And then actually during the open house that was open for public comment, as well as the 2 work sessions that the Planning Commission had, I thought we had received some comments from people during those meetings. So maybe I'm not remembering that correctly, but
We didn't have that many people.
true. That's the unfortunate part.
As the Chronicle, as we all know, is phasing out and becoming digital, not everyone's going to be able to get the paper copy. In the future, are we going to look at other ways to reach out to the public?
I'm not sure we've really discussed that, but we do have I think, I'm not sure if we've ever really talked about that. We have our requirements as required by ORS, but Gene, is that something?
Something that may need to be looked at again, because I noticed that with the way the local paper is now, by the time I get it in my mailbox,
Mhm.
the post office, most of the things have already happened.
Correct. And if you do actually pay for a paper, you do also have the opportunity to do the electronic. That is something I'm ready to cancel.
I have to know that something's happening, and I have to go look for it.
Correct. Well, I mean, yeah.
No, you read it just like you read your
Yeah,
paper.
right. And I actually kind of enjoy the
Just on
electronic
screen.
copy.
It's actually
so-
kind of cool.
I didn't care.
I was
for it.
very unhappy at first, but it's kind of cool.
Okay, name and address again. You may have to pull the microphone down.
Lorraine Hunt, Post Office Box 81. That's a good question, Brent Bybee, because go into the Angelo Planning Group website and look at what happened in Beaverton, and then compare what's happening here, and just think about public involvement and how to make it better. So just, there's a whole section on it they have. They did a wonderful job in Beaverton, so the last thing I want to say is, I have a feeling for the homeless too. We have a home in Eugene, and I do a lot of things with homeless people in our neighborhood. They need housing. There's an RM and RH, there's medium density and high density where they can be in. And we moved to a low density area because this is very personal. We have a son who has a medical condition, and we looked for 6 months for a home in an area where there was clean air. This street has it's big properties with clean air. We didn't choose it because they're big, huge properties. We wanted the air for our son. And it has a one-way street. We said low traffic. I mean, if you'd know the conditions that he has to live under, what's happening now with what's happening next to us, we just had a wedding anniversary on the 27th. We couldn't do it at our home. Our other son is in Lisle, Washington because of what's going on. We don't even talk to the developer because he hasn't listened to us this whole time. So, I mean, there's no point in making any statements to him, seriously. So that's just what's happening. It's not a home test anymore. I used to have plants in my yard, they're gone. And I use a different entrance, but we can't be a family. Does our family matter? I want the homeless to have places. There are places for them to be. We looked a long time for this place because we have a family and we want to be together, and we can't. So that's our reason that's why I'm so passionate about this. There are family considerations. Other people move there to be in low density for other reasons, but we have very serious medical reasons, and it's really impacting our lives. So there are reasons for laws and low density, et cetera. Think carefully before those are changed. Thank you, and I'm out of here.
So, Brent, just to add a little bit more to your question, we aren't required to notify property owners in those residential zones unless we're adding language that is more restrictive. So with these changes that we're proposing, we're actually looking at opening up and making them less restrictive. That doesn't require us to do the notification.
That applies to the whole city.
Correct. So a residential zone, right?
Okay.
I think we need a reader board.
These meetings are televised, right?
They are also televised, that is correct. And I think I've said this to every single one of you on the Planning Commission. One of my biggest pet peeves is that we don't have more community involvement and we don't have people showing up at these meetings and being involved. This is a venue or an opportunity for people to actually at least watch and see what we are saying and what we're doing and decisions that you, the Planning Commission, are making. And that's something that we haven't ever had up until this last year. And I hope that people do get more involved, but unfortunately, I am like everybody else. I have plans during the week, and there's other meetings that I want to be at, and unfortunately, we're all very busy, and we aren't getting involved when we should probably be a little more involved.
There is a way for people to make comments as they're watching, is that correct?
I don't know. We don't have the interactive on our Facebook, no.
I think it's just still need to do that.
No, and that would be the Immense Imagery that had done a couple city council meetings, and I think they also did a couple of our planning commission meetings where comments were made on that Facebook live feed. We don't actually have that as an opportunity.
We currently have 0 people watching.
Okay, so I guess Paula does know if, oh, wow, okay, so
So let's wave to them.
have you been watching through the meeting to see if we've had any public?
I haven't watched it the entire time, but I've seen no one check.
Okay, dang it.
When I stayed awake
So that's unfortunate.
Well, I was just asking those questions because I thought there might be, and I don't know whether this would come up against some sort of law which says you can't do this, but that people who are watching can also make comments which would be accessible to the city planning department so that you had, people who couldn't come here, you would know what the feeling was out there. I mean, is this a possible avenue that the city could?
I'm not sure. I mean, they always have the opportunity to provide writing, any type of notification, or with knowing that there's a public hearing, they're providing us copies of any comments that they may have or any concerns if they're unable to make the meeting. So I don't know if that's even something we would look to entertain.
I would suspect the technology is there if you want to pay for it. It's a cost if you can probably get anything you want if you can pay for it. But I would like to say it was really refreshing today to actually have people interacting. I mean, it makes a huge difference.
Right.
It's huge. Sometimes it's really hard to know what do you do when nobody
Says anything.
yeah. So I know, I'm sorry that people left and, because they were so passionate and, but it, you know, even if you're passionate and you don't agree, it's nice that you showed up and
Absolutely.
said something.
I
That's
think
awesome.
I can speak for all of us in the planning department. Any comment, whether they agree or disagree with staff, it's something, we're getting some input back from the people that we serve.
And it would be nice to find a way, unfortunately, particularly in public service, perception is reality. And if the perception is you aren't listening to me, then that's real. Whether we tried or not, it's real. So what do we do? What do we do that's different? I have no idea, but
Well, we've been trying for years to try to
it's
involve the public, and
it's
the
tough.
thing we did the best on, I think, was when we started talking about how you pay for infill.
Right.
And we managed to get a good-sized group, and we ended up with a couple committees to take on stuff. And it was actually quite productive, but you got to get something that's pretty
controversial.
intense or something.
Well, in these smaller communities too, I mean, can't compare it to Beaverton where they're getting 500 people. That's a really large community, so.
Well, 500 people out of that size of community is not very many people.
Yeah.
Perspective.
And if you want to know anything more about that process, let me know, because my firm ran that process.
Anyway.
I feel sorry for her situation, though. But the other situation is very much similar to that, is if you have a beautiful view and you want to maintain that view, you don't have any right to it, but if you want to maintain the view, you have to go out and buy the property and block it.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but that's the way things are.
I think John summarized it well, talking about that we're not really changing any densities, that some of these things that you guys are looking at making changes to are already available, ready, things that the minimum lot size is 5,000, we're not making any changes to that. There's some minor changes, and Matt went over those for the RL zone, which is reducing a duplex lot size, and then the ADU requirement, not increasing it in the RL zone, increasing it potentially through an administrative process for the RM and the RH zones. So, and then removing the owner occupancy.
Yes, sir.
Is the comment period over?
No,
No?
we haven't closed it yet.
Yep.
Jonathan Blum, 403 East 8th in the Dalles. I just wanted to comment, because of the testimony that you guys have been hearing a lot of and the public hearing process, both through Planning Commission and City Council, it seems, from an outsider view, it might seem suspect that there's this change to the corner lot size, which directly applies to the kind of duplex that I'm constructing at this time. My understanding is that these plans have been, or this change in the land use has been in the works for many years, which way predates any time that I think it predates when we owned that lot, in fact. So I don't know, I don't think there's anybody watching at home, but I just wanted to put that out there as like it seems, you'd be like, oh, well, it's a conspiracy because of this, that this is here, but it's not a conspiracy. These plans have been afoot for a time longer than we've owned that lot for. So I just wanted to disclose that if there was any suspicion of collusion or something like that, because for us, we just looked at the code, we saw that the code currently read as it did, and we went through the appropriate process to get that approved, which, thank you guys.
So our housing needs analysis had started in 2016, and then it was completed in 2017, so pretty valid.
Well, that's one of the things that we've been kind of dealing with ever since I've been on the planning commission, and that's as state law changes, there are sections of our code that have to be adapted to the change in the state law. And that's part of a living organism. You're going to have to adapt or District District.
Which is what Steve's comment was all about.
Yeah. I think at this point, it's coordinate, our objective is to come up with a motion to send this on to the city council, correct?
Correct.
As it's marked up. Before we actually get into that, do the commissioners have any questions or discussions that you want to carry on now before we proceed with a motion?
I have some statements
Okay.
that I can make. As I rehearsed with Jonathan Bloom earlier, I'm a progressive type person. I like having the development going on. I like a growing city. That said, the Dalles has its own ambiance, and it's an ambiance that is very attractive to a lot of people, and a lot of people have moved here because of that ambiance. And I want to be very careful that we don't change that ambiance by making some of these changes within here. I made a comment back when we were doing the housing needs analysis that a lot of the things that they're asking us to do is Portland-like, that the state's trying to turn us into a Portland-type community, and I would put my foot down hard against that. And Portland didn't become Portland overnight. It didn't happen by a single change. It's a segment-by-segment change, a small decision here, a small decision there. And once you go down that path, once you make a change from a larger lot size to a smaller lot size, you can't go back the other way. So, and what Matt had said during the housing needs analysis is, it's a recommendation, it's not a requirement that you have to follow all of these rules. That we have the choice on this planning commission, that we can make whatever choices we wish to have as this community would like. So that said, I look at each of these changes very carefully in how it would make a change to our community. The fact that residential low density has very minor changes is awesome, because that's where most of us are concerned about. The housing crisis, as it's been termed, is something that is a popular phrase that is thrown around. But we've seen housing crises about every 7 to 10 years, and that's a typical market influence where prices go up, it's harder to get a place, rents go up, it's harder to get a place. But then what happens is people see that, and it becomes more of a availability to build something more. So that's when you start getting more of the infill and that type of things going on, which we're seeing a lot of in this town right now. So I'm not sure making all the changes we want to make is the right way to go. And so I want to look at them individually rather than as a group. That's my comment.
From some of the examples we heard, well, and especially because as proposed in the RL zone, it would just be the corner lots getting the change put into place. I think it really boils down to the landowners have a choice if they want to do that. They don't have to do that, and if you and your neighbors are all on board with not doing that, they reserve that right. But if someone, let's say, if someone decides to move away and buys a house, they decide they want to do that, they have that choice as well. And as stated, it's a gradual process that's not gonna take place within the next year. It's gonna happen over a long period of time. One thing that I really experienced, I moved out here about 3 years ago. One thing I experienced moving out here was trying to find a home just to live in is near impossible here. I looked for a house for 4 or 5 months. I was living in a friend's basement until I could finally find my own place. And the place that I did find was half of my income, my monthly income. And if you think about the student debt that I just got put on top of that, that's another quarter of my income. And then on top of that, bills, whatever else comes up, food, it really starts adding up. I think it's really important to consider affordable housing in this town. It's all over the place. It's an issue, and I think it's going to continue to be an issue in the Dalles.
Sorry, Jeff.
We'll still be friends, Sherry.
Yeah. But, you know, same thing, I haven't purchased a home since I moved back for numerous reasons, but I actively, kind of keeping an eye on what's going on, and it's sad what is available, and because I'm looking in other communities as well, where things are new and actually something you would want to live in. You wouldn't have to completely remodel. You could actually afford it. There's an infrastructure. So I think that there are people who are here and would like nothing to alter. I also think there are a lot of people who are not here because nothing is altering. And there are some people who are saying maybe this was not the right place for me to be because it's just, so it's, there's different points of view, and we do have some housing needs that are not being met. And if somebody still wants to have a lot size that's 3 times too big for what they can build there, God bless them. And I don't think honestly, I don't think what we do here is going to change much at all as far as what people are doing. What I do believe in is having consistent, legal, quantifiable, distinct guidelines to follow, as opposed to things coming to the commission. And then I think, because we get into a place where we could be accused of being arbitrary and capricious, because, well, I like that one, but I don't like that one. It's hard to be, it's hard to, when you don't have something quantifiable and definite, not to get personal, right? I mean, it just is. And so I really applaud what Angelo Group has done in like hammering us until we said, okay, yeah, you're right. You know what? We need something that can help the staff at the planning department actually do what they need to do and remove some things.
They've also been open to our suggestions.
Yes, so I think we worked really hard on this stuff, and I'd like to see us kind of move forward, and I don't think any of it's really horribly radical, is it? I mean, so anyway, that's my opinion for what it's worth.
Yeah, I would second your opinion, Sherry. I think that the work that's been done by the Angelo Group it carries a weight because that's what they do, and we went through a process which we could all comment all the way through it. We were listened to, changes were made, and so I appreciate the process that we went through, and I don't think we could have done much better than we have done here. And the other thing is, this is really all about language, looking at our code and cleaning it up and making it work for the changes in the state law. Steve, you said that. That's what we're doing here. It's language. And these guys helped us see that, so I just appreciate that.
Steve?
My comment would be that, again, to mirror what you said, we're not talking about sweeping changes. We're just trying to make clear and definable language that can be, respected by those parties involved. I would also state that without inviting one further resident of this town, there's a tidal wave of housing needs coming at us. If you haven't gone to the Cherry Festival and looked down 6th Street and seen the 500,000 children that I see, you'll understand that it's coming. There's a housing crisis. We just need to look 15 or 20 years down the road, and when all of those little candy grabbers are looking for a place to live. I'm not, I'm serious, They're here, we are here as a community, and we need to think in terms of how we can responsibly develop the needs of our future. And we need to think about the fact that we will never be able to move our urban growth boundary without responsibly infilling. So the clear and definable language to address that is not a step backwards.
Well, at this point, what would you want to do? What do you want to do?
So Bruce, did you close the public portion of the hearing?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Do you want to have time to read some of these things that were handed tonight?
Well, that's part of the question. Do you feel like there's a need to do that?
I'd like to read them.
I don't feel so compelled, but I've read them actually, and some of them are things that we already got. One of them I got in my email, my inbox months and months and months ago. So I've read it numerous times. But I do hope that some of the people that came here tonight show up at the city council meeting and at other places, and they keep coming and talking to us. I mean, whether we agree or not, I sure do hope they keep coming, because that was nice.
Can we close the public portion of the meeting?
Okay with me.
Not much public left.
Do we have a need? Hear more testimony.
Yeah, 2 people out here we haven't heard from.
Do you have testimony?
We'll introduce you to them
They're
soon.
gonna do it.
Okay.
That's coming next.
Who do they work for, the city or?
For us, yeah.
Okay. So they could testify at least to their housing needs. Well, I'm inclined to close the public testimony at this point. And like I say, it's getting close to time that we should be going home, and I'd like to know what you want to do from here. If somebody wants to throw a motion out, that'd be one thing to do.
This is closed, is it public testimony?
Yes, it is. You have a proposed resolution and you have your proposed amendments that Angela prepared, so you could move to adopt the resolution. Your pleasure.
Would adopting the resolution take care of the recommendation in total, or is there 2 different things here?
Well, it would include the language that Matt presented tonight.
Well, there's the-
Went over. Those amendments
Basic
would be
statement of what
recommended
the
to the council.
resolution would be. This all would get moved to the city council.
Correct.
For approval.
Okay, so I'll make the motion to recommend to the city council approval of the various housing code amendments to the Dallas Municipal Code, Resolution 567-18, approving ZOA 97-18.
So just a correction, that was Resolution 576-18.
Yes.
Oh,
And with that correction, I will second.
Any discussion at this point? Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Did you get that one?
Yes, Stiles is next.
Yeah.
Yes.
Only because I want to second.
Thank you.
Well, I told you we wouldn't always agree.
Yeah.
No.
And it's a good thing.
That's a
Yeah.
good thing.
It's a good
Yeah.
thing, yeah. Okay.
here.
I buried it someplace. Oh, there it is. I knew I had it.
That's mine.
Okay,
You can use it.
so we passed the resolution. Staff comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your next regularly scheduled meeting is August 16th, and we do not have any public hearing items scheduled for that meeting. So if you wish, we could cancel that meeting.
Question?
Answer?
What about the school district and its presentation about Dry Hollow?
The representative from the school district never responded to my email. So I sent another email out today and said that the meeting will be held in September, and we will give them a date for which to attend.
Okay.
Well, I don't think we necessarily want to come out and meet and just twiddle our thumbs, so.
Right, and again, yeah, never got a response. I gave them today's date and the 16th, and never got a response. And so it's time to move
That's
on.
odd.
They may be on
But that-
vacation this time of year.
They've been rehearsing and meeting, and
Well, the email was sent several weeks ago.
so that's interesting, they didn't
Yeah.
respond.
So, again, we have no public hearing scheduled for the 16th, so if you'd like to cancel that meeting, we could go ahead and do that, and then we would have your 2 meetings in September. And one of those, we will have representatives from the school districts and from the elementary school. Also, if you remember the conditional use permit we had some time ago with the RV park on West 10th Street, and that was before you a few months ago, and you extended that CUP for another 6 months. The applicant was in last week and did submit their engineered plans, drawings, which had been a condition of approval. So we do have those now, and so we forward those to our engineering department. We're also reviewing those at the planning department. And so, again, we'll report back to you in September the status of that. There has been no construction at the site for quite some time, but I understand that they have been doing some cleanup work, and they did retain a professional engineering firm, so we do have those plans now. And the 2 individuals who just have been here this entire evening in rapture and paying attention here, we have 2 new staff members with us. One is Riley Marcus. She's been with us for about 4 or 5 weeks now, and the other is Mr. Joshua Chandler, just this week. And so you will see them on occasion when they're here before you, and we wanted them to come to this meeting because, one, to introduce them, and because of the topic this evening. So here they are. Yay.
Did we disappoint? Did we disappoint?
You guys poached her from us, from the county.
Yay, way to go.
So, and also, if you may remember, you did have the 2 applications in May on West 19th Street and at Perkins and West 13th? Was it East 19th? You had the minor partition and the adjustments. Those items were both approved by this body. They were subsequently appealed to the city council. The council conducted properly noticed public hearings on both, and they upheld the planning commission's approval and denied the appeal on both. Since that time, the appellant of the project on 13th and Perkins has filed a request for a refund of the appeal fee. That'll be going to city council. And that individual has also filed an appeal with the Oregon State Land Use Boards of Appeals for that particular item. So just to let you know that there's still some activity on both of those items. So with that, that concludes the staff's comments this evening. And I do want to thank, Dawn for her work on this item this evening, as well as Matt Hasty and his team from Angela Planning Group. Thanks.
Commissioner comments and questions? Okay, let's see all of the agenda. Let's go home.
Congratulations, first meeting. Woo-hoo.